right. Well, let's go ahead and start then.
All right. Hey, so what's up, Pete?
So let's do the official start. All right. Welcome to another edition of Capcom Confidential. I'm one of your hosts, Pete Fabiano, and with me is
Me?
you. Yeah,
oh,
you.
not that guy?
No,
Oh, yeah.
next.
My name's
He's a
Matt
guest.
Walker. Yeah.
What? What's your name?
Matt Walker.
Matt
Yeah.
Walker.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for being here, Matt Walker.
Thanks, Pete.
All right. And we're also joined by a special guest today. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Petr Zapotocky.
Yeah, I didn't want to say his last name.
Is that Polish?
It's not Polish. That's Czech.
Okay. Right on.
But yeah, I'm a rigger here in Capcom. So
Nice.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, he's a rigger, but he's got a very colorful background that we'll definitely explore today. So it's nice to have a special guest. We haven't had a guest on in a while.
It's been a while, yeah. It's been a while since we've done one of these. And we've only done like one or two other times where we've done a live stream with a guest where we were interesting the guest, right?
Yes,
So that's
right.
new.
Well, I
That's
mean,
new.
I think the last time was with Coulda.
It was
right?
Coulda,
Yeah, where we went
right.
through his story. So
There you go.
this would be a performance with Mr.
all right, we're going there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we're also we're trying a new setup here today because it turns out that YouTube has changed their rules. So in order to stream with a phone, you need to have over 1,000 subscribers, and we
So
don't
hint.
we don't have 1,000 subscribers. So we're trying with the MacBook today, and please let us know whether this is any better than the phone or if the phone is better. In which case, we'll have to do something to get 1,000 subscribers so that we can use the phone again.
Appeal to YouTube.
Yeah. And side note.
Christian says this is better. All right, so maybe
Okay,
we
awesome.
probably do
Maybe
this
we
all
should
the
just
time.
do this from now on.
Nice.
But side note, I wanted to mention that Capcom has officially stated that 12 p.m. here, Japan time, is our official lunchtime. So we don't want to keep Peter for too long because I know he's got to go work out.
He's got to work out. He's got the guns. He's one of the ones that, I'd always talked about wanting to do like a Boys of Capcom calendar. And he's definitely one of the ones.
Did you actually?
Oh yeah. I want you and Troy and Miguel and Joey. Joel. There you go. And
Akamatsu-san.
Okay, yeah.
Yep. I want to get all you guys, and I want to make a Boys of Capcom calendar.
Like the fireman calendar.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Exactly.
what I was thinking. That's exactly
I'm
what I
going to
was
start
thinking.
working out more now so that I
So
can,
they got a
join in.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
There you go.
I'll just be like the guy on the middle page that no one cares about.
Hey man, get you on there. That'll be good. We'll have you in a hard
With
hat.
like the
It'll be
kitten
good.
instead of your belly.
Yeah, exactly. Wait, I don't have a belly.
No.
It's okay.
Yeah, that's maybe if we're lucky, then by the end of the episode, as he's getting ready to work out, Big Pete will. I call him Big Pete.
Because I'm Little Pete.
You're not Little Pete. Wow,
No, I am
you were
small.
Boss Pete. You were Boss Pete until you
Right.
weren't my boss anymore. But yeah, Big Pete can take his shirt off, and then you'll just have your tank top on, and we can see the guns.
Sure.
I'm excited about that.
Well, you can see the
Okay.
guns now.
There you go.
Yeah,
Oh, true enough.
that's all right.
Well,
All right,
and one interesting thing
It's
about him
Capcom,
too.
right?
Yeah, is
It's
he
not the
actually
gym.
does parkour as well, but just a little
I love it.
warming everyone up to your
Well, yeah, you're a
exciting
rigger. You
background.
kind of want to know how the anatomy works, right?
And that's why you do parkour.
Yeah, exactly.
You push the body.
That's
to
the
see.
reason.
That's the reason, right? Okay, well, fair enough. So yeah, let's get right into it. I haven't said this in a while, so what's your deal? That's how we started off.
Yeah.
But no, we'll just go into it. So you mentioned you're Czech, so obviously, tell us a little bit about life out there and what.
Yeah.
what it's all like.
So I first I thought that I was going to become a doctor because my mom's a really good doctor.
What does she practice?
Neurology.
Nice.
So I was going
Is
to follow
she,
in that footsteps.
Is she a neuroscientist? Is she a neurosurgeon?
No, neurologist. She specializes in multiple sclerosis.
Oh wow!
Cool. Okay.
So I was very much going to follow those kind of footsteps. So
Right.
I kind of applied to the three main medical schools that we have in Czech, and then I kind of realized that I want to spend 6 years in school, and then like get
residency.
paid minimum wage because that's how it is for doctors in
Yeah,
Czech. Like
yeah.
you're really struggling. You kind of need a second job when you become a doctor.
Wow.
Really?
Because, yeah. It's really shitty.
Do you find that many people then take up and leave and move to somewhere like the U.S. because
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. That is a big problem in Czech for doctors at least.
Interesting.
But because of all that background, like I had my dad was kind of into computers, and so I kind of naturally gravitated. Like I think I put my first computer together when I was like 6.
Okay.
And,
Wow.
and so like I kind of have the technology background and like the like body science kind of background.
So
And,
wait, you said your dad was into computers. What is it your dad does then?
It's hard to explain in Czech. It's basically like, I mean, in English, but it's basically if someone like rips DVDs and stuff like that, he would go with the SWAT team to that guy's apartment and then like confiscate the computers, and then he would be the one that would be like deciding like how much damage did that guy do, and
So he's on like a cyber task force for the police?
For like copyright law.
Right?
He used to be. He's 80 years old now, so he's retired.
He's 80.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
How old were you when you were born then?
I was 50.
50.
When I was
Okay.
born, yeah.
Cool. Right on.
So I got two stepbrothers that's like their kids are my age.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Ish, right? But
Cool.
that's kind of
Wow.
crazy. But yeah, anyway, to continue on, I applied to the medical school, then I realized like I don't want to spend my life that way, because I was going to follow in multiple sclerosis, but there's no real cure for multiple sclerosis. So I realized like I'll be just sitting in the office like telling people that I can't cure them.
Oh, okay.
So that felt kind of depressing to me at that point, right, as a teenager. So my sister actually found this like English kind of school, English kind of like private university kind of deal. And so we both went there. Like she went graphical design route, and I went like it was like interactive media called the course. And
this is all in English?
This was all in English, but
Okay.
was happening in Prague, in Czech, right?
Right.
So that's how I basically like I kind of touched up on the whole Adobe suite and a lot of 3D applications, and that kind of like the university let me experience a lot of those programs, and I kind of fell in love with rigging animation. So
can you explain a little bit about rigging for those the uninitiated? Because
right,
obviously
sure.
we're in the industry,
so I always say like if anyone asks me like what I do, it's hard to explain because you kind of have to have a lot of understanding of a lot of concepts of what goes into like creating a 3D asset. But basically, like when you see something on the screen, it's like when you see a CG character on the screen, someone needs to model it. Someone needs to create the actual model of it, like if you're sculpting something from clay, right? But then the animators, like the program doesn't know where the joints are. Like so the like someone needs to go in the model and define like how the model is gonna move, like set some rules for like where's the shoulder, like if I do this, like should this part of the body move as well, or should just only this part move? So that's basically rigging. You're just putting in joints where joints should be. And sometimes nowadays with current technology, you can kind of do kind of anatomy as well. So in movies, you would have like complex muscle systems that you can set up, and it simulates like flesh really well. Obviously in games, everything needs to happen real time. So you have only like limited, you have some maintenance that you need to work around. But yeah, I think we're kind of going in a right direction to kind of simulate anatomy even in games a little bit more. So
I know this is a slightly different meaning from what you were talking about. But when I talk about rigging and I try to explain to somebody like what rigging is, what I usually think of is most literally what you were saying, only in different context, with a skeleton and the muscles, you know?
right.
And like a person without a skeleton and muscles, they're just like a blob, right? And they can't
Right.
like they can't actually like there's no defined way for them to move,
Mhm.
right? But with muscles and with the skeleton, you have the definition, you have the structure that you need
Sure.
to define how that person's going to move,
Mhm,
that
mhm.
articulation, right?
And it's based off of that the animators that can work, right? Like if no one goes in and sets a rig for a character, the animators don't have anything to work with because the animators need to move it in you know, you need to move your
Right.
wrist, you need to move your arms.
There needs to be parameters set, otherwise
Yeah.
they can't have those movements. Yeah.
Very much. So it is like basically setting in bones and muscles into the 3D model
Right.
that someone can then move and animate.
I imagine we took quite a jump here, though. You started in interactive media in school, and then you didn't just become a rigger, did you?
No, I didn't. But so how that school worked was very different from other schools that work, like how other schools work in Czech, and that's there was no tests. There was no like you need to do like this by next week. There was we had trimesters, and at the end of each trimester you had like a kind of like a project. So it was kind of to simulate.
I'm just gonna do this.
The camera here.
I'm just doing this so that we can hopefully you guys can hear him a little better.
I want to see you too, man.
No, I'll get in there. Don't worry. It's good. It's good. No,
So-
no, don't move back. Don't move back. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. I want to get you guys as close to the camera as possible. Keep talking.
So there was always like at the end of the trimester there was always like a you had a project for 3 months and
Right.
you need to finish that project. So it was up to you if you're gonna finish it in a month and it's gonna be like of this quality, or if you're gonna finish it in 3 months
Right.
and like explore a bit more and research a little bit more. So that was really interesting for me because up until then, like all the schools were kind of like you just like getting a shit ton of knowledge just thrown your way, and no one really cares if you remember any of it. So that was kind of the school was supposed to simulate like a real life studio where a lot of people wanted to work in. So yeah, at the end of the program was H&D, like Higher National Diploma, and then if I did like a one more year, I would have a bachelor's degree. But it turned out that like the bachelor's degree was more tailored towards fine arts and kind of like experimental arts, which I'm not fond of.
Mm-hmm.
And so I chose to just ditch school after the H&D and got the H&D. But at the end of the 2-year H&D program, there was something called final show, and that's basically like you pick a thing that you're focusing on for like the last 6 months or something of the semester, and you just explore that as much as you can, and like work closely with your teachers and try to learn like new ways of doing things. And so what I did that time was chose like animating a character. And at that time, mind you, I didn't know anything that goes into like I didn't know what rigging was. Like until I started that, I had no idea what rigging was.
Right.
And even like what I need to do in order to animate a character, right? So I just put in bones into the character and started animating the bones. And it turns out that's not how rigging works, right? So I know that we talked about like rigging is basically inserting bones and muscles, but for animators to influence that directly would be a lot of pain in the ass because all the bones are kind of inside the mesh, so you like it becomes very cluttered.
What's a mesh?
Thanks. So the mesh is basically like the 3D model of the asset. On top of the bones, you kind of have control objects, which is basically just a curve in space that the animator can easily select when they're working on the model on the asset. So I didn't know that that's what goes into rigging,
right.
And so I just started animating bones, and it soon became apparent to me that like that's not the way to go. So there was a lot of like feedback and back and forth with my teacher as well. And by the end of by the time that the final show came in, I created like a character with a muscle system for the pecs and for the deltoids, just because that's the most like the hardest area to do. Like if you want to do nice deformations for that area, yeah, because like that joint just rotates all the way around, right? So by that time, like I created a character and with all the muscles, and I think there's still a YouTube video somewhere of it. Because that was like my first reel, right?
You'll show up.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you type in like Petr Zapotocky, it's gonna show up. But that was basically like my first like stab at rigging. And but until then, I got a job at advertising agency. So I was kind of doing like graphical design. I was kind of like what was the name? It was like an art director, like something art director. And I was basically like preparing a lot of the online campaigns for Chibo, like a European coffee brand. And like a year in, I got an opportunity to go to Singapore with like there was like a what's it called? Kind of like tryouts for like who gets to go to Singapore. Like they reached out to. Sure, yeah. Okay. They reached out to a lot of the students of the school that I went to and like other schools around Europe. And there was a select few that were chosen with like, okay, like you guys are good and are very interested in it. So we're going to send you to Singapore and give you like a tour of different studios. And so I went to Singapore for a week and went to like a shit ton of studios, like there was like a tour of we had a tour of Ubisoft, we had a tour of LucasArts, right? Wow. And at that time, like for my final show.
Was that your first kind of interaction with games at all?
Well, at that point it was movies, right? Like I was all about movies. I wanted to do movies, and so that was extremely interesting for me because all of a sudden I was in like a very closed environment and in Czech because there's not really schools that teach this. Like I was lucky enough that like that school I went to was kind of teaching it, but not really. Like if I would ask something like more advanced, my teacher wouldn't know. Right. So I then went to the studios and it was just very refreshing to like see all that feedback and see all like how these guys work, and it was really interesting. So I remember like before for the final show there was a tutorial that I found online by Carlos Sansonetti, and it was like a lead rigger on Star Wars Clone Wars. Oh, nice. And it was for Namon, right? Like one of the most like prominent schools in VFX, and and I knew at that point that he worked in Singapore in the same studio that we went to see and to have a tour in. So when the like tour person asked us like, is there anyone like specifically you'd like to talk to? I asked for Carlos, and they said like, oh, he's actually very busy, so
Right.
so we're gonna send like a different rigger in there. And so I got to ask a lot of questions, and it was very interesting for me, like to see all that. Like, okay, so this is what you're looking for in a rigger. Like, if I would like to, eventually apply. And so the minute I came back, I went to my boss in the advertising agency. I was like, dude, I'm sorry, I can't do 2D anymore. Like, I need to shift to 3D like sector. So I literally quit like within a week after coming back from Singapore.
No options on the table. You
Not
said,
really,
you know
no.
what,
I
I'm
was
not
just
doing
like, well, if I'm gonna focus on this all the time, then like I know that I'm gonna focus like 20% of looking into 3D. So it was better for me to like just quit that job and be like, all right, I'm going 100% in, and found actually a job in like a month in an advertising agency as well, but 3D advertising, so commercials for TV, right? And so I worked there for like 2 years. And then I was fortunate enough to get a job in MPC, Moving Picture Company in London. And so I moved over there, and that was like I would literally got the call, and then movie companies have a lot of turnover. So it was like, all right, can you start in 2 weeks? And so I had to move to London in like 2 weeks time, right?
Yeah.
Along with like giving, telling my boss that like, sorry, dude, I'm quitting,
Right.
moving to London. So I worked in MPC for like a year and a half or something like that, and it kind of started to be like very clear to me that movie industry is very like I would say not good, especially towards new people.
What do you mean not good? Do you mean the conditions are bad? Do you mean that?
So I didn't do any overtime in MPC, but like the pay was really bad, especially for living in London. Like
Right.
London is expensive as hell,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so I was barely able to save something while living in an apartment that barely fit like my bed, and maybe like the same space as the bed occupied was like next to it, and that's it. And I was barely able to save any money, and I don't smoke and I don't drink, so I didn't go out.
Are
Right?
those the preeminent causes for people to not save money?
I think so. Because like if I would go out like even every weekend,
Right.
like I wouldn't be able to save anything.
Right.
Like with the money that I was making, right? So that's when I realized like, okay, like movie industry maybe like is not that good. Like I understand that at that point in the eyes of the VFX industry, I was very much a junior, right?
Right.
But at the same time, like at the time we were doing Maleficent, and so for that MPC needed to hire a lot of riggers because like the core team was like maybe 6 people, and we jumped up to like 13 over
How
the
many
course of
characters
Maleficent.
did you have to rig?
Oh, there was a ton. I can't tell you the number.
Wow.
Because Maleficent's like the whole thing, all the fairies in the forest,
Right,
like that's
right,
all 3D, right? So there was a lot of rigging work to do, and like MPC wasn't on just one title, right? Like there was
Sure.
Maleficent, there was like the Lone Ranger, there was other stuff, and so for all that, we bumped up to like 13 riggers in really short amount of time, and I would look around and see like people that were hired as juniors as well, but like obviously subjectively compared to my skill, I would be thinking like, how did these people get hired? Like I didn't understand, because like common sense is really not that common, especially in our industry, I find. And
So wait, can you go a little bit into more details as what you define as common sense?
well, it's like it's hard to explain, because it's like if I do this, something else will break, but that something else becomes a problem in like an hour. You know, like not even having like that kind of future proofing in your head when you're making a decision is like, well, you shouldn't be doing this job in the first place, because like especially rigging is very much about like, if I'm gonna rig this way now, how is it gonna move in animation? And if you don't have that understanding, or if you're like you want to do something, like there's a lot of things that are happening script wise, right? In rigging, because it just saves a lot of time. And so you need to create your own procedures, you need to be able to create your own script. And some of these people like wouldn't know how to script, or like would rather write their own script than use something that's already in the shared library, which is a colossal waste of time, right? So without even like searching for it, they wouldn't even have the thought of like first search for the procedure if it's there, and then if it's not, then I'm gonna talk to my superior and ask him if it's okay if I create it. It's like this I consider common sense. It's like this is intelligence, like just in that department.
Well, it sounds to me like you had a better understanding of perhaps efficiencies and dependencies, where I think maybe some of the others were not really considering the dependencies that were there, and you were able to actually foresee them.
That could very well be, but again, like this is all subjective, right?
Sure.
So I don't want to like come
No,
off here as like being like, oh, I can do perfect. It's like, no, I can't. I can like fuck up all the time as well.
Of course. But it sounds like you felt you were a little bit above what they had labeled as juniors.
Yeah, I felt that way, right?
Right.
And even though like I knew that I was on the same pay, so at that point I was like, okay, like I knew that the lead was considering me to stay for the next title as well, which is not that common in movies. Like usually you hire for a title and then just like fire those people as the title finishes.
And then a new team will come in.
Exactly. So I appreciated that, but at the same time, it's like it was very just London. Like you can't have your own apartment unless you're like 10 years in the company, you're in management. Like there's no way that's happening.
Right.
So even now, like if I get job offers from London, I just turn them down immediately because it's like, well, I can't go back there anyway to live that kind of life. But yeah, so that was kind of eye-opening for me, and after that year and a half, I went back to Prague and went back to the commercial studio because the money was much better, and it was actually kind of interesting work because you have to work with a different set of kind of like walls that you need to overcome. And then I got an offer from a friend in Prime Focus, and the money was much better than in MPC. So I was like, you know what, I want to work on movies still, so like I'm gonna give it a shot. And worked there for a year and something, and worked on Hercules and what was it? Can't remember.
It's my understanding that unless you're in a studio like a Pixar or something Disney Animation, there is a lot of churn. There is a lot of turnover, right? And so the way that you not only gain more skill, but also move up in terms of salary and position is to actually jump from company to company so that you can then get you get a pay raise, you get more recognition, you have all those titles under your belt.
Right. Like in a Western company, that would be very true. Yeah.
Right.
And this is what I'm saying in the Western company, right? Because now we're in Japan and it's very much not that way.
Right.
But anyway, like after that, after Prime Focus, like when I was working in Prime Focus, there was a movie that came out, Life of Pi.
Right.
And and it was like by far the best 3D like CG tiger that you've seen on screen. Like even professional wouldn't be able to tell that it's a CG tiger, right? And after that movie came out, the studio Rhythm and Hughes that did the movie bankrupt.
Right.
And
the margins are quite small. There's actually a number of discussions and even a podcast, as far as I remember, discussing how small the margins are and how hard it is to keep a company like a CG company afloat.
Yeah. So what happened was that at that time as well, actually it was when I was in MPC, I think, because at that time as well, Rhythm and Hughes was working on Percy Jackson 2. And so because Rhythm and Hughes bankrupt, we got Percy Jackson 2 and we had to do like 400 shots in like 2 months. Jeez. Which is a lot if you don't know. So yeah, like that's when you kind of really start realizing like how messed up the movie industry is and how like nobody really cares about like if the studio is gonna work like the next month, or like 20th Century Fox and like all these companies just care about like what's gonna be the cheapest studio, right? And so for that, sometimes the studio, what they do is they kind of cut down the cost, so they like even lower than the production cost actually, just so that they can get that job and hopefully like build that portfolio of theirs and kind of hope to get more work that way, right?
Right. And that's not just a movie industry thing by any means, right? I mean, that's very much any industry. When you have a company that they kind of their job is to take on work like that. Don't worry about me. Don't keep me in frame. I want to make sure that you guys let's make sure that you guys actually are in frame. I want you guys.
Okay.
I want
Matt
you
the
guys.
cameraman.
I want you guys to be as close to the mic as possible.
Okay.
So, but like even in the game industry, you certainly have different studios that you work with, where you'll find out if you talk to them that when sometimes in order to get work, they'll do that. They'll in order to like undercut each other.
Yeah, I think that happens across the board. I do think it's egregious in film, however. I don't know if it's been stabilized since
I don't know
the
too.
bankruptcy of Rhythm and Hughes, but I know that it's really tough. The margins are really, really hard, and people are just looking, to undercut each other and get the lowest
Right.
bid so they can come in and get awarded the project to keep themselves afloat. But that's not sustainable, right?
Right. And also, like the biggest problem that I saw there was a lot of people wanting to get into movies just to work on movies,
Sure.
and
Sure.
willing to
Yep.
like
There's the passion
not
there,
get
right?
the pay for it and work overtime.
Yep.
Right.
And ultimately, what that's doing, like that person is being a massive dick, because
Well,
like,
that
it's-
person or the company?
no, that person.
Oh, the person
because
who's actually
it's
taking the job.
extremely selfish because you don't realize the bigger picture and you don't realize what that means to the industry, because the industry is just hungry for people that want to get paid less. And
Well, they don't want to get paid less.
well, not
they're
want
willing
to get, they're willing to get
less,
paid
yeah.
less, right? And so what then starts to happen is that like a lot of the studios start hiring people as like, oh, you want to work on movies? Cool. Like we're gonna pay you like a shit pay, but you're gonna have to stay until 10 p.m. And they're like, no, that's cool. I want to work on Harry Potter. And it's like, well, that's not what you should do.
Well, that's one of the
by
reasons for
no
unions,
means.
right? You have the unions and you have people in those unions
Right.
so they can be protected from these sort of
Right.
things.
And yeah, the same thing happens in games, right? The same thing happens in games. It's different.
can.
Maybe it's a little different in
Right.
Japan,
It's certainly very
Well,
different
No,
in Japan.
that problem with like people just hungry to get into the industry is very much like it, no matter what industry
Sure,
it is, right?
sure. Getting in.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But you don't have
it's
to
a
run
high
the risk
demand.
of being cut in Japan, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
obviously there are people that do, but
right.
overall there's more job stability.
Right. So yeah, like that was one of the biggest problems that I saw, and like at the same time, I think it came. It was like DNEG, I think, had at one point like 500 unpaid interns. That all of a sudden it came into light, and yeah, because it's
Do
like,
we need
hey,
to verify this? Or
Yeah, no, right.
yeah. I think it was DNEG, right? I don't know. I know for sure there was Blizzard.
Don't want to, get anyone in trouble.
Yeah. Sorry.
Rumors and speculation. Rumors and speculation.
This is Pete's memory.
I think. All right. But yeah, there was like a huge problem, and so that's why the first thing that I said when I came to Prime Focus is like, I'm not doing any overtime. And I said that on the first day, and everyone was kind of like respectful and understanding of that.
Nice.
Which really surprised me, and I was glad that they saw it.
That's
that way,
great.
right? But I'm kind of like that. I'm kind of like, if I
You
see
mean
a problem,
unpaid
I
overtime,
just,
right? Or
Yeah,
you're just
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I'm never doing overtime.
Well,
at
the
all.
thing is, like, I like hobbies. I like
Sure.
life outside the company. I
Sure.
think you need life outside the company,
Great.
right?
Makes you grow as a person. It makes
yeah,
you see
yeah,
things
yeah,
differently too.
And I know that culture is big in Europe and Western countries. It's not here in Japan, I would say. That culture of like having hobbies and doing stuff outside of the company. But yeah, like I'm a person that just wants to do something. Like in London, every day after going to work, I went to the other side of the city to go to a gymnastics gym and train with my friends, right?
Cool.
So like I needed that time, and I didn't want to do any overtime, even if it was paid.
Sure.
So yeah, that was like one of the biggest problems that I saw in that industry, and that's why after the year in Prime Focus, or year and a half, I kind of got back to Czech. I had some money saved up, so I was freelancing for like a year. And then my friend who used to work with me in Prime Focus, he also used to work in Japan. So he got talking to me and was like, hey, by the way, there's a position opening in Capcom, like if you're interested in that. And I was like, interesting, because like 2 weeks before, we talked with my ex-fiance about like wanting to go to Eastern countries. And kind of like would be interesting to see that kind of philosophy and like just Eastern culture. And so when my friend got in contact with me, it was like, actually, we were just talking about this. Yeah, set me up.
Great timing, right?
yeah.
Did your friend work at Capcom?
I don't know if he worked in Capcom or some other Japanese company, but like he heard from Chisan, I think. And
Who happens to be one of the managers here.
Yeah,
project
right.
manager.
Project managers. Yep.
So-
Oh man.
that's how I kind of ended up here after like 5 interviews. That was like the most rigorous interview process that I've ever been through.
Well, you know, like we said, there's job stability, so you have to make sure there's a good fit, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of process that goes through
Sure, yeah. I mean, for like when I was interviewing for NPC, there was up until then, I learned my language, my English from movies. So my English was very much like American and slang American, right? And so when I had the interview with NPC, obviously I didn't fly over.
Right.
I had an interview with 2 Englishmen over a speakerphone. And and I was used to American English, right? So like understanding English in the first place and over speakerphone, I think I understood like 50% of what they were saying. And so it was kind of hilarious, and I'm still like in disbelief that I got the part because like I was literally like when I didn't understand anything, I was just like, yeah.
Well,
so
you must be somewhat good at interviewing. You went through 5 here.
Yeah. So yeah, then like this interview for Capcom came in, and I was very much, because I was used from movies that like they want you pretty much immediately because they have the project lined up.
Right.
In Japan, it's very different, right? So from the start of the interview process to the end of it, it's probably like 2 months.
Okay.
And so when a Western movie company asks you like when can you start, you kind of feel like pressure to say like as soon as possible, right? So you want to say like next week, like in 2 weeks.
Right.
That's why I started NPC in 2 weeks. But here I was like, well, I want to take some time like before I go here, so at least like a month and a half, right?
Right.
And they came back with, well, actually, like we're gonna set up the visa for you, and that will take at least 2 months anyway, so you're fine, right? And that was very reassuring to me. I was like, okay, so you're kind of like planning for the future. You're not just wanting me for 3 months, so that was really nice.
I mean, just hiring, having been a manager here in Japan, just hiring in and of itself can sometimes take up to 6 months or even a year to get the right person, right? And then, of course, if you're overseas, as they mentioned to you, it could take 2 months. It usually takes about 2 months to obtain a visa. And then you have to think about moving over and your life. And you're uprooting everything just to move to another country. So there are some things to consider.
Definitely.
And I think that there is I like to think that there's planning involved, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to need this down the pipes. So let's start hiring because we know it's going to take this long to get that person in.
I wish I saw more of that planning, but.
So where did the Forbes 30 under 30 fall?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
don't you don't have to blush.
No, I don't know. I was just contacted by this girl that worked for Forbes, and it's Czech Forbes, so it's 30 under 30 out of 10 million people. Like it's not.
Nice.
It's
not.
Still pretty hard odds.
Well, out of those 10 million people who are in their like 20s to 30s, right? Like it's very. All I'm saying is the audience isn't that huge, right? And but yeah, so I was in 30 under 30 in Forbes in Czech, but
for what?
Because of what I achieved.
That's true, because your picture was, you were in front of the Capcom building, right?
Yeah, because they asked me to like, what picture do you want to use? And so I just, work in Capcom, so what the hell. But I always find this really strange because I don't feel like I achieved anything special. It's like I'm doing job that I like.
Right.
And I feel like inherently, if you're doing something that you like, you're gonna be good at it. Even if you don't spend every living minute of it, like at home doing it as well, right? Like it's like even if you're just doing it at work and be able to like crave new knowledge, like just research all the time. But I do kind of have that cutoff point of like it's 6 p.m. I'm gonna go home, and I'm gonna try to focus on something else than work because I don't want to bring my work to home. Right?
But you get to reset your mind, clear it. I mean, you work out, so there's a level of. But it's not just working out. You're actually training your body to do certain things, right?
Yeah,
like
I'm very much like
it's meditation in a way.
Like stretch your body and stretch your mind kind of thing. Like you kind of need to work on both, right? Like it's not just mind and it's not just body.
Right.
Like if you don't have both, I kind of want that balance. So yeah, especially like if I go like now over lunch, like if I go to the park and do some like light gymnastics basics or something, like it helps me to clear my mind and come back to the office with like a reset attitude, right?
Yeah.
So it's very much like coming in the morning because I feel like I came to work for the first time, right? It's not like sitting at the desk for 8 hours straight, just like slowly draining all that energy out. Like it's a nice reset, I find. So.
Yeah, as much as I want to save money by bringing a bag lunch or something like that, I always I talk with Matt too, but you want to go outside, take a walk. You want to do something. You want to remove yourself from the environment that you're in all day for 8 hours or more, right?
Right.
So it's very important. I totally agree. When I'm at the gym, I get to reset my brain. You're lifting weights, but while you're lifting those weights, you're kind of clearing your mind. You're thinking of different things.
Right.
It's a great way to relax. And also just think about things for the week. A lot of times I find myself thinking about, okay, well, this week what's going to happen, or what am I thinking? Last week what happened, and you kind of become introspective, right? I think a lot of those things happen, and you take it to an even higher level.
Yeah. Well, any kind of like, I'm very much like into the Eastern philosophies and meditation and Tai Chi and stuff like that. But a lot of it falls under active meditation. Actually, like there's passive meditation when you would sit in lotus, right, whatever, and just like try to focus on or not focus. But active meditation is basically like Tai Chi is a form of active meditation. Any kind of thing that you're focusing on is a form of active meditation. So if I'm in the zone in the scripts, you could say that's a form of active meditation.
Right.
So, and that definitely helps to kind of like sharpen the mind, I feel, especially with workout, especially like when you don't have to focus on anything in your brain and you just focus on just, like if you're doing bench press, like you just focus on doing weights and like doing your best. It clears the mind very well, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if this is good or bad, but a lot of times I find myself now doing a set, kind of resetting the brain, and then reading the news in between sets, and then going back and doing that, and just kind of learning and also trying to work out at the same time to try and get. But it's also
I would advise against that myself.
I agree. It's more of a necessity because I have less time than I used to. So I try to shoe everything in, but it's better to just kind of reset and not think about anything. Maybe listen to music like classical or something that kind of keeps the mind engaged.
So what project did you work on when you got into Capcom?
So the first project I worked on was Biohazard 7, I think. And I just did like light, Resident Evil 7. I just did like light rigging for some of the characters and some of the props because when I first came to Capcom, I kind of realized that they like the separation of the departments is not as clear as it would be in Western companies.
Right.
Like there's been so much happening in the 3D department that there's a lot of separation now. Like someone is doing strictly just meshes, someone is doing strictly rigs, someone is doing strictly animation.
Right.
And this is just the character workflow, right? Like, and then you have the destruction workflow, and like everything is very much specialized, right? At least in Western companies. Here, it didn't reach here yet, so like you would have people that are generalists, and that is very much not a good thing, I would say, in a big studio like this. Like, if you want to focus on something, you kind of really like, like if you're focusing on two things, you're not gonna focus on either one of those 100%. And that's ultimately going to cost you quality somewhere down the line or efficiency somewhere down the line, right?
So to that, just to add something, I think that comes down to a lot of the differences in design philosophy. So for example, as you mentioned earlier, maybe you have a guy that is only looking at one thing and not considering the dependencies. I think what they want to kind of grow here is the ability for everyone to kind of look at it big picture. It doesn't work that way in the end because a lot of times guys are just focused on whatever it is they're doing. But they want them to think, like a lot of times in the past from the stories I've heard, even programmers would give design ideas or come back and say certain things to make things different. And having a general knowledge, to your point, it doesn't grow specialists, which in and of itself is a deficiency. But at the same time, it has people thinking about the overall big picture, as knowing all of these parts.
I would say in a Western company that would be true. I would very much argue against that being true in a Japanese company.
And what would your reason be?
So, in Japanese companies, like I've only worked in Capcom, right? So I can't say like in Japanese companies. I can say in Capcom, but this is something that I've heard as a rumor from other people working in companies as well. But like Japanese people don't do feedback, and they don't do talking to one another. Like communication is one skill that they're not inherently good at. And so like when you're talking about like they want people to like understand the bigger picture, no one here understands the bigger picture. No one here understands the work that comes after them. Like for me as a rigger, like I started as a generalist, but what I took from that was that I know how the mesh is created. I know how the animation needs to behave. And because I was focusing on commercials and movies, like I know how then it needs to get rendered. Right. And so because of that, I feel like that makes me a better rigger. Because I know what comes after me. I know what comes before me. I can have a conversation with the person who did the model and say like, hey, can you adjust this? Because it's not going to move well even before I start doing the rig, because I already like built some kind of intuition and I know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I also know what comes after me, so I can be like, if I have a discussion with an animator of like how do they intend to move this character, I can then ask like, okay, so did you think about that? And they're like, oh, actually we didn't. And it's like, this is something that I expect from an animator to think about, but they don't think about a lot of these things, right? So they really, like what I've seen here a lot is that they think only in their like small silo and not in the big picture at all.
So in the end, as I was saying, ultimately, I think the theory behind it is what you're explaining, but ultimately it doesn't end up that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I would
regardless
say so.
of what your experience with other people has been, I can certainly say that like it is vital that like as a rigger, for instance, like like okay, this is how the animator's gonna need to animate it. Like these are the things that they're gonna come up against when they're animating it. So I have to know how can I make their job easier, right? Yeah, I mean, and at least on the Devil May Cry team, I think we tried to have that to an extent. It's interesting on the Devil May Cry team, the people that handle the rigs are the modelers.
Yes, and this is actually
in
this is
Japanese
not,
companies.
Yes,
yeah.
this is not just the SMG team. This is in general. I think we've moved away from that. Hopefully, like we're trying to go away from that. But it's been the modelers who are actually putting in. So the animators, they have their input, but the modeler is the one who rigs.
Right.
So there's kind of a disconnect there because the expectations are not always in line.
Well, I wouldn't have too much of an issue with that if you were a good modeler and if you were a good rigger, right? But what I see a lot, if a modeler is trying to put in the joints for a character, is that they put the joints like in places where they shouldn't be. And by shouldn't be, I mean like I would get fired in a studio if I did that, right? And so like that's something that I'm trying to avoid by having like a distinct rigging pipeline here.
Right.
And so that's like some of the scripts that we're working on now is just like really just introducing like a good rigging flow and like trying to analyze the different workflows and try to push the efficiency as much as we can and in terms of like what can be automated and what can be what still needs to be.
Well, another thing that you and I talk about too, we discussed a couple weeks ago was the idea of efficiency versus quality, right?
Right.
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 And there really is a bit of a trade-off there, isn't there?
Right.
Well, there's always going to be a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
It's always like for me working in commercial background, I know a lot of the clients would always go like, okay, we need this in 2 days and we need it to look like Avatar. And it's like, well, it's inherently not going to happen just by default. Like you can't do that. So there's always that kind of requirement, right? Like you always want something really fast and really high quality. But unless you have a really like top-notch pipeline, like that's never going to happen. Yeah. And so you always need to prioritize one or the other. What I'm missing here is a lot is talk about both actually. Like I was gonna say quality only, but I've never heard anyone talking about efficiency except for me and Brett, which are like the only like high-level gaijin here in Capcom.
Right. Well, it also sounds like you need to have a lot more pre-production pipelines established before you go into the production phase, and that's where I think some of the disconnect happens. Because one of the things I often hear is that Japan is a culture of artisans, and they are very, very extreme about looking at details, right? Which is great. But maybe that loses some of the efficiency, right? Because you're focused on the craft rather than. And
also, like I've seen a lot of the problems come from the lack of feedback as well. Because I've seen for the first year that I was here, and I didn't know this, and I'm kind of versed in Python, so I do all my scripts in Python, and my work is probably like 80% Python and like 20% Maya. And so because of that, I can automate a lot of tasks. And if someone came with like, hey, I'm doing this for the 10th time, it's probably repetitive, it probably can be automated, then I could definitely have a conversation with the person and find out the most efficient flow. But what I found out, like after a year and a half being here, is that someone was doing like retargeting of facial shapes to 256 joints, each shape by hand.
Wow. Okay.
And
the artisan approach.
That's literally, and without feedback, without thinking themselves that it's like, hey, I'm doing this, like all the time, and it's fairly like a repetitive task. It probably can be automated. I should have a talk with a TA or something, technical artist. And that didn't happen, right? So eventually, like I think it came out to be like 12 characters, and each character took like a month. So you literally just spent a year of someone's life, like doing a task that I could script that could be done in half a day. Right, so it's this kind of feedback that's missing, and this kind of like self-thinking of like, hey, I think this could be automated, that is I find missing in the Japanese culture a lot, because like at that point you could like devote your time to something that matters more, right? Like that can't be automated, right?
And I feel like you probably can speak more to this, but I get the impression that like the idea of having technical artists here is something that's relatively new for Capcom too. So I wonder if part of it also is that people don't realize that, oh my God, I could ask somebody to automate this for me.
Yeah, I think, it could stem from anything. I'm not going to venture a guess here, but
right.
it could be just that's the way it's always been done, so people continue to do
Right,
it. It could be
right.
because you're young and you're afraid to speak up, so that's, you just follow through with the status quo. There are a number of reasons why it could exist.
Yes.
What's very important is that it's changing, and people are looking at things a little bit differently.
Hopefully,
And so that's really good. In the end, I mean, you see the quality shine through, but as someone who's on the ground floor, it's really hard because you see things that could be done better, and you could allocate resources somewhere else, where instead of putting this time-intensive thing to work, and it's something that could be done in half a day instead of 6 months, you could then say, okay, well, we could add to something else somewhere else. So yeah, I think I totally understand that.
Well, especially for someone like I'm obsessed with efficiency, right? Like even in my work, I try to be as efficient as I can be. If I find something new that I can use that is more efficient than the thing I'm using right now, I'm gonna explore it, right? So like I don't think I've used a Maya menu in ages. Like I have all the things that I need on shortcuts or on my custom shelf, right? So like very much so for someone who's obsessed with efficiency, seeing how the inefficiency is going on in other departments without me being able to directly influence it can be frustrating, I would say.
Right.
Yep.
And
you're a stickler for efficiency.
yeah. Like I mean, especially like if you don't have specialists, for those like distinct jobs, and especially like right now we're dealing with not enough engineers, and so you do want to like if you don't have enough people, your primary concern should be efficiency. Right, because if you can automate a ton of these things, then all of a sudden the people that you have are going to be enough.
You free up resources.
Right? Yeah. And so if the efficiency is not being given a priority, like you're kind of thinking like, well, what are you guys doing? Like you really need to kind of reevaluate your priorities to kind of figure out like where you want to be in like 2 years.
I think it's fascinating because you can discuss a lot of these philosophies. I'm sure if you sat down with one of the other people on the team, they'd have a completely different approach to this or a completely different perspective and say, no, we can't do that because we need that very small attention to detail, where you're saying, no, you don't, not in that field, not in that section. You can actually automate that.
Well, the thing is with attention to detail is like you don't have to sacrifice this for automation.
Right.
Automation is just a tool that helps you get to a certain baseline, and from that, instead of spending, like even with the automated system for retargeting the facial shapes to joints, like if that would be done in half a day, and then need some like hand-on tweaking, like that still wouldn't take a year. That would probably still like take, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks at max, right? So you don't have to sacrifice the attention to detail if you go in the automation route.
You have a couple of questions up here. One of them is...
Yeah, we're kind of ignoring the chat. Sorry about
that.
Yeah,
no. We're I think it's important that we have the discussion so people can hear. And I know you're pressed for time. So
that's right.
One person's asking, has any scene been cut or reworked because of a problem you've had?
So because of something having
not been efficient,
or not
you kind of need to
being worked through the way...
Well,
or let me rephrase this. Because I think what this question is specifically referring to is the idea of having that knowledge of the pipeline before you and the pipeline after you. So has any scene ever been reworked because we went through a process where somebody didn't have that knowledge of the process before them or after them, and as a result, they had to go back and rework stuff.
I would say yes. I would say there's definitely sometimes like in every studio's like development cycle that's going to happen. Yeah. I wish it happened more in Capcom. Yeah. I wish it did, because in other studios what you would have is you would log down concept art, and then you would have before you log down concept art, you would have a discussion with the TAs, with the riggers, with the leaders of the department that are going to touch on the asset, and have a conversation with them. Is like, hey, we designed this character. Is this possible? Because for example, the character can have like layered clothing. And it's like, hey, can we like actually do this in the engine to look good? Or like, how do we approach this problem that we have that we didn't have until now in the engine? And this conversation does not happen here. And we're trying to instate it now. But because of that, a lot of the things that they do is like, it's just like, hey, here's a concept art, make a model. And then from the modeling, it just comes to rigging, saying literally like, hey, here's a model, make a rig for it. And I'm the only one in that whole like process that actually asks questions. And I actually go back to the concept artist or to the art director of the project and ask like, hey, I just got this model, like why wasn't I aware that like there's gonna be so much cloth, and how do you intend this character to move? I'm the only one who then comes in and asks like how this is actually supposed to move, because it's one thing to model a static model,
Right.
and a one thing to make a static model look good when it's moving.
Oh, yeah,
And
definitely.
think about all the cloth sim that is going to be involved, right?
and cloth sim or other things, right? You
Right.
can have like if you have a character that's
Being carried.
that's being carried like by another character, you need to have a system for that in the engine. Otherwise, you would end up with that animation where like the fingers are kind of slipping with the model, and you can see that it's two different animations trying to line up, right? Like if you don't have those systems, and this is something that needs to happen before the model even starts being done for that asset. And this is something that we don't have here yet. And this is something that would like help enormously, because right now we have, for example, a lot of characters with cloth, and we need to kind of figure out a way how to make that work, even though like we didn't get the heads up for it.
Right.
And so as to that question, I would say it doesn't happen as much as it should.
What doesn't happen too much?
It like the going
Early
back or
discussions.
cutting something out or redesigning something because we don't have the technical abilities to do it to a certain standard that we set for ourselves, is like we need to be able to do that. Like we need to be able to say like, hey, this isn't going to work unless we devote a month of R&D on the engine side, and then we can have a conversation about that. It's like, hey, it's 1 month.
This goes back to the foresight, right? You had
Exactly.
There was the foresight that was missing.
Yeah.
You acknowledge
Right.
the problem, and rather than going back, you're just going to push forward.
Yeah.
I'll say as an example for SNG, actually for Devil May Cry, actually very specifically related to rigs. Originally, when we scanned the characters, we were going to make them complete digital doubles. And so I mean, when a digital double is literally, it's you scan somebody and that character, that model should look one-to-one, should look exactly like that character, you know? And that was our original plan. And then partway through, we decided, you know what? In order to make this character look more like Dante, in order to make this character look more like Trish, we actually want to change a little bit. And so what we had to go back and redo is we had already had the facial rig for these characters.
Right.
And for instance, it was like, well, this model, the model that we scanned for whichever one of them was the nose. The nose was slightly crooked. So we said, you know what, we want to straighten the nose. And so we went through the painstaking process of then straightening the nose, and then that means that you have to redo the facial rigs.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And you know, all those blend shapes and everything, it's crazy. So there are instances where that does happen. I suppose in retrospect, now that I've said that doesn't have as much to do with not having a understanding of the pipeline before or after. That was just what we call a spec change. But yeah,
I mean, it comes down to planning, right? So
Yeah.
like in every studio that I worked at, like planning is the only reason to do overtime. And it happens quite a lot here. Just misplanning is the only reason to do overtime, right? And so that's why, like, when people join my section, I tell them, like, no, you're gonna go home at 6 because I'm gonna plan for this section, and I'm gonna take care of like the planning that needs to happen on the rigging side of things. Because if you ask a Japanese person, it's like, hey, is this doable? They're never gonna say no. Like they have this like so much like they feel like they would like disappoint the person if they said no.
Okay.
So just inherently they say, oh yeah, we could do this, right? And instead of saying like, no, you should have told me this a week ago. Like, no, we're not gonna do that.
So when they say no, we say, yeah, we could do this. Does it occur then where they say yeah, but then for whatever reason that doesn't get done? Or
no, they actually stay
they'll
like
force-
until 2
I see.
a.m. so
That's
that
why
they can
that's why
finish
they
it,
work
right?
overtime. Okay,
So
okay.
that's why like if like I want my guys to give me an estimate, I ask them to give me an estimate based on a 7.5 hour day.
Nice.
Right?
Okay.
Because like if
Very
you're
nice.
gonna give me an estimate of 3 days, I'm gonna be like, well, okay, how long is your day then?
Right.
Like, how
Right.
long are you counting your day to be? And I've seen some of these like Q&As with developers and some of them like saying like, well, overtime needs to happen, like it's gonna happen. And it's like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't need to happen if you plan properly.
Yeah, proper planning.
And if you mess up and like that plan, like if for example something needs to change, that will come.
Sure.
But at that time you extend the deadline. Like there's no reason for like something to all of a sudden like if that happens that people need to do overtime, you didn't plan correctly. And that's on you. Like, that's not on anyone else. That's on the person who decided that plan. And so I see that quite a bit here. It's like just people not future-proofing enough, not planning enough. If they say like, well, this is gonna take 3 days, then they're not accounting for buffer in there. They're not accounting for the fact that they're gonna be in like 2-hour meetings every day. It's like, that's why like Brett, one of our TAs here at TAD, he's from EA, and they got this concept of like capacity, right? So like if you would have a leader of a section, he would, for example, have 50% capacity, which means that if he would say that this takes 2 days, it would actually take 4 days, because 50% of his time he's in meetings, he's in other stuff, right? And they don't have that concept here. So if they say it's gonna take 3 days,
It's 3 days without the exigencies, right?
Exactly,
Without all the
exactly. So that's also, it's like, it's just this future proofing, and planning is like thinking about what might happen. Like for me, for like a rigging TD, it's very much about like what I think can happen later on and proofing so that it doesn't happen already. Like taking care of the problem before the problem even happens,
Nice,
right?
nice.
So, and I know that like it's very subjective because, and kind of selfish because I have that thinking, I kind of expect other people to have that thinking. And obviously you can't do that. Like that's not how people work. But if I see someone like on a planning position or on a higher position and not having that kind of thinking, it's very disappointing, I would say.
Yeah, and I've actually had very specific conversations with Itsuno-san. They go the same way, where he said like the exact same kind of thing too. Like he expects certain things out of people, but a lot of times he has to take a step back and realize that like, you know,
They're not him.
Right, exactly.
But you know, you can kind of foster that culture, especially, I think the real challenge is you need to be in a position of management or a position where you can,
Right.
you know, enact change. I think you're fortunate because a lot of people do listen to you. You are making a lot of headway,
Right.
Which is great. You know, in your, what, year and a half, 2 years here now?
3.5.
Holy crap,
Yeah,
has
I
it
know,
been
it's
that
been,
long?
it's been a long time.
Damn, I remember when you first started.
Yeah.
I can't believe
I didn't speak any Japanese.
That's actually another thing that I think is extremely impressive. You came here and you didn't really speak any Japanese, and now you can have full-on conversations. That is impressive.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, I learned the way that like you learn words that you need, right? So I can have a technical conversation with my coworkers, but I don't know the same words that a kid knows, right? So like it's been only like a year ago that I learned how to say the word bear, like animal.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know that because like I didn't need it in my everyday life, right? And so like I find myself like going to these like meetings with my friends, and they have kids, and like the kids try talking to me, and I understand like 50% of what they're saying, because it's like I didn't have that education. I didn't read any kid books,
know what
right?
you need to know, right? And that's where it starts.
Right.
So,
But I think it
it's
helps.
great.
Like I'm natural, like a curious person. Like right now
Right.
in I'm 32 now, and right now I kind of have the mentality of like, oh, fuck, I wish I paid attention at school because I want to know everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so
That's
because
close to
of that,
impossible, but that's great. That's a
no,
great
but like
attitude to
I have that mentality now, right? Like I wish I listened in like history. I wish I listened in like
wish I
more
knew
biology,
more, right?
you know. And it's because like all of a sudden everything's interesting to me, and I think that definitely helps because like to me kanji are interesting, right? Like the Japanese language is interesting. Learning how the sentence is structured is interesting to me. So I think that definitely helps. Like if you have that kind of mentality, like obviously if you're gonna have the mentality of like, well, it's just the language. Like no, they should learn English.
Well,
to
that's
understand
crazy
me.
because we're in Japan.
Yeah, I know. But like you still meet foreigners that have that mentality here, right?
Sure.
And it's like, well, why did you move to Japan then?
Right.
So, yeah.
I think part of it's you know, you guys are talking about language here, and there could be a part of this too, where there is something getting lost in translation because you know of that language ability. The other thing is, I mean, the other thing is discussions happen all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. So like there are just like you're having these discussions with certain people. There's also a pretty good chance that somebody else had those discussions with people somewhere else, you know.
Right.
But those two discussions haven't gotten linked
They
together.
don't culminate, right? They
And
don't come
that,
together.
yeah, that's another thing that, I mean, it really is, it's hard, but you need good like project managers and those kind of people to help make sure that everybody's getting in the same place and sharing those opinions together so that everyone's aware of what's going on.
Well, that comes down to what he mentioned that we all often mention as well as communication, right?
Yep.
Communication seems like such a simple thing, right? Like we're just talking, it's done,
Right.
but it's not. And I never realized the value of it until I came into you know, the corporate world, and I realized like because I just like talking to people, and I want them to know things if I know something, I want to share that knowledge, right? And so a lot of times I'll sit down with people and have these discussions and realize that it was never disseminated from somewhere else.
Right.
People never had that perspective.
Right.
And then it's just a bunch of evangelizing, right? You're just out there and you're trying to evangelize and trying to get that going. And it works. It takes time. You have to have patience. You know, and I don't think this is just indicative of Japan. Corporations at large tend to have so many moving parts that when you do specialize, a lot of times you don't have people talking to each other the way they should. And it's a large studio or a publisher like we are, we have individual studios and they don't share information. Like Team X doesn't talk to Team Y, so they don't know what's, and then once the team is disbanded and they go to the next project, that information isn't shared. So there's a lot that needs to be set up, and I think there's a lot of room for change. And yeah, I don't know if you have any closing words. I know you got to run, so I don't want to.
No, it's all right. This is kind of interesting. So
I'm glad you enjoy it.
As a beginner, like, I gotta go get my workout in. Goddamn it.
No, because I find that like when I came here, I would say probably I was a little bit arrogant in a way that like I came from Western studios, so I would have a certain idea of how to do things.
Right.
And I think I was a little bit arrogant here to seeing like, because it was such a different way of doing things that they did things here, that that you like, why the hell aren't you using this? You know, like why the hell aren't you using that or doing that?
Right.
Or how are you building tools like that? Like that's like 15 years ago. Like I feel like the experience here very much helped me grow in that sense, in a way that like I do realize that that like, well, it's because they had a different, you know, the upbringing of the company was very different, and so they didn't have TAs, they didn't have technical artists that would do tools for them, so they had to like kind of do tools on their own, at which point the quality shows, right? The reason why they're using a certain tool is because they didn't have anyone to do a tool for them that would do the same thing, and so that's why they're sticking with that tool. So it's always comes to that first like understanding of why something's happening, and then trying to like figure out you know, a course of action, how to like solve the problem at hand, because a lot of the inefficiencies here also comes down to the workflow that isn't as efficient as it could be. But then like when you start to analyze it, you're like, yeah, like the first idea of a foreigner would be like, oh my God, this is horrible. Like, why are you guys doing this that way? And I've kind of grown to kind of go into the workflow and be like, oh, I see, you did that because you didn't have that. Okay, well, let's see, like, give me all the reasons why you're using this tool, and then we can talk about like what can we do about like fixing that. Right?
So what you just said right now, I'd like to just describe to you kind of in a sociological perspective. You mentioned earlier that they didn't have common sense, but the reality is their common sense is different from your common sense. And so the problem becomes exactly what you just described. The more you talk, you start to realize that your common sense is not in line with what they're thinking. And once you explain that, it starts to kind of ingrain itself into that. And that's really what common sense is. I think when people use the word common sense, they think like, this is just normal, you should know. And sometimes across cultures, that is absolutely true. But when you're dealing with so many people, and I'm not just even talking about like the American culture or the Japanese culture, I'm talking about just cultures within a system. Their common sense is going to be different. So when we're talking, if we don't have the same common sense, you're talking around, and that goes to communication too. So a lot of those things are really important pieces that you need to kind of pick out and try to understand what those definitions are.
It's fantastic that you're picking that up.
No, I think like the discrepancy between like if I would move from Czech to London as I did before, the discrepancy would be much smaller in what I would consider being the ideal difference between common sense, right? But obviously when you move to a completely different culture, I was not ready for that at all, right? So all of a sudden you're thrown into a studio, you're thrown into a big studio, and you're all of a sudden thinking, oh my God, like how did they make it so far? And how are they making these games like that good with this kind of workflow, right? And so that's something that like we're trying to like fix nowadays.
It's fantastic, man. It's fantastic.
All that.
That's the thing. Yeah, it's a big studio with a legacy. You know,
a
legacy. It's a different culture. You know, you have it's your third language. You know, right? It's your third language. So all these factors combined, I can certainly see that you might be stressed, but you're doing a fantastic job.
Oh yeah,
you know?
no, I wasn't kidding when I said you're making amazing headway. I mean, in your 3.5 years here, you've made a lot of changes. That's fantastic.
Well, a lot of the things here is what I would consider to be normal for rigging, and that's why like it's really hard to like with my skills, I wouldn't probably impress anyone overseas, or like impress. Like I would probably be on the level where I'm supposed to be, but I would still like if I would show something like that to a lead rigging TD, he would be like,
Technical director.
yeah, whatever. But here they're always like, oh my God, we can do this. That's amazing, right? Because they didn't have anyone who's specializing in rigging.
Right.
And so they don't know that that's like a norm right now.
Right.
So if I want to push myself forward in my career, if I want to be a better rigger, I have to set those walls myself. I want to set those goals myself because I don't have that feedback from my lead that I would have in a Western studio.
Right.
I mean, I feel like, I mean, that's really important. That's really important in life. And but what I would say is that skill and the fact that you do that, that's not just because you're a good rigger. That's something that
that's him.
And I don't want to use the word overachiever because that's not what I want to go for. But for someone remarkable, for someone to do something remarkable in life, that's the kind of mindset that they have to have. You know?
Sure.
Well, you have what a buzzword. You have grit, right? You went after that. You went at you have hustle. You wanted to. You picked up and left multiple times.
Sure.
You left your home.
Sure.
That alone is a challenge for a lot of people, right? So I think you had a really strong background. The way you were raised around, you were shown a lot of that, and also it's just intrinsically who you are. So you want to do better. You want, like you've said it multiple times. You're just hungry for knowledge, and you just found your focus, and you're adding to that.
Right.
So there's a lot to be said there, and then now you're sharing that. So.
Well, I think like a lot of times, like people say that like TV shows are bad for kids, but I feel like TV shows especially like made me like kind of have the kind of morals that I have right now, and the kind of like idea of like planning 20 moves ahead, not 2, right? Like there was a show, Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda, right? With Dylan Hunt, right? And he would always like have a plan, right? Like he would always like his plan would always work. Like other people were planning too, but they were thinking like two moves ahead, and like he was always thinking like 5 moves ahead, right?
He's doing,
so exactly, right? And that's interesting to me, right? And that was like that kind of very much shaped me when I was a teenager because I just gobbled up those shows.
That's cool.
And so I think like that's where a lot of that like thinking comes from is just like trying to be like that good leader. Like I don't want to be a boss, I want to be a leader, right?
That's
like I
really
do
important.
see that distinction. And I don't see a lot of good leaders around. So not just Capcom, like just
no. I understand. A good leader is very, very hard to find. So there's boss and there's leader. There's manager. There's leader.
Sure.
Right. I think they're different things. What do you define as a leader?
Well, a leader I would probably say helps his people grow, right? Like helps like trying to like. I don't want to be in the back lines, like telling my soldiers, like, yeah, just run into them, right? Like, I want to be there with them, right? And kind of like help them achieve what they can do and kind of like guide them towards like something like to progress in their career, to progress in what they're doing.
Right.
I think also for that, like for a leader position, it requires kind of an alpha personality, and I don't see that a lot in Japan.
Right.
Especially when it comes to leaders of the departments here, I don't see alpha personality anywhere.
Oh, I see alphas, but it depends. It's not. It's not necessarily about what you're describing.
But in my team, for example, right, the section leaders, it's not someone that would say like, no, we're doing this, we're doing it this way, right? Like, or someone who would actually be thinking strategically. And thinking like, you know what, like we're gonna want to move this character like this, so why don't you throw joints in here as well? There's no one like that, and they're always like concerned about like the opinion of others. It's like, dude, you're a leader. Like you should be in this position because or you define. Like I don't want to have a conversation with 20 animators. That's what a leader is for, so that I, as a leader of the rigging section, can have a conversation with the leader of the animation section. And finalize how we're gonna do the structure of a rig, finalize how this character is gonna move. If you, every time I ask you a question, need to go to your animators and ask for opinions, you shouldn't be the leader, right? Like that's inherent a leader personality, or like the section leader, what he should do and he should know. But
the problem is we're in a consensus-based society, so there needs to be that shared knowledge base. So there's a challenge, right? And in a way, from a Western perspective, sometimes it's hard because there is what seems to be a contradiction where you have a hierarchy, because Japan is very hierarchical, but at the same time, it's very consensus-based. So how do those two things coexist?
Yeah.
It's a real challenge.
It's definitely very interesting.
Well, I'm glad we were very entertaining today.
We didn't answer too many questions though.
No, yeah, there's some good questions there. Let's see, is there anything that...
Oh, does Peter know Japanese language?
Matt,
Yeah, I
drop
do.
a hint. I need some Sound 6 projects. Sorry, I can't do that. Peter looks like Nico Bellic. Yeah, only much buffer. I'm happy Peter and Matt are at Capcom. Thank you, Flamer. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yes, wise words.
Don't you guys, here's an interesting one. Don't you guys do these conversations debates with multiple teams weekly? Because I think some Western studios, like Santa Monica, makes good decisions after making discussions with multiple teams.
We have discussions. We certainly do. I don't think they're weekly necessarily. I mean, project-based, they're sometimes daily, depending on. And
But
you can
between
speak to that.
between
teams, that happens. I think people grab beers together,
Right.
and there's a lot that happens kind of off to the side, not necessarily officially. I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah,
for sure.
that's something. Yeah, I think it would be fantastic if. So that's a great Whale XCM. That's a really great suggestion, and that's something that we've talked about this during interviews for DMC5 as well. But really, there wasn't much cross pollination between like DMC5 and RE2, for instance, even though those two titles were running at the same time.
And on just very close floors.
Just like a couple floors,
Same building.
just 2 floors.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 floors between them. But yeah, what would end up happening is we wouldn't have anything formal like that. But we would have people. They might hang out after work. They might go get a beer or something like that, where they might kind of share war stories. But yeah, we haven't quite had that kind of structural meeting going organizationally yet, and that would be something that would really help us out. That being said, I do want to say that, for instance, RE2 and DMC5 both use the RE engine, right?
Right.
Well, the RE engine, that's a whole team of people.
And they're going to share that knowledge.
And they share that knowledge, and they have people, and then they lend people to RE2, and they lend people to DMC5, and then those people will bring their information back to the larger team. And really, that's when Pete, before Pete and I were over here in R&D1, when Pete was the head of global production, that's what we would do too.
Yeah.
We were different.
That was one of our, I think, ethics, or at least the one I wanted to make sure we push forward, right? We always shared information across teams. Right.
Me and a couple other guys, like we were called production managers, and we weren't called producers, we were called production managers, even though we were doing the same work. And we would do that. We would be on different projects, and then we would come back to the main group, the main global production group, and share knowledge so that we all were able to learn from each other.
Happened? How did you solve it?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, this is how I did it. Okay, let me go back and tell the team that.
But you can also see how easy it is with foreigners. But the same kind of discussion would not happen in a Japanese environment.
There might be a cultural thing there to an extent.
I was gonna say to XCM. I completely agree with you that that's not always the case, and it's completely fine if you disagree with me. It's everything that I say.
The question was, I disagree with you. I guess discussing with multiple animators creates more ideas than talking to one lead animator and ignoring the other ideas.
I completely agree with that. That is not the message that I was trying to get across. It's when you have a simple question. It's like, hey, do you want the rotation like this of the wrist to be on the x-axis or the y-axis? And he needs to poll every animator. Like every single question, he needs to go to every animator, or feels very uncertain himself and wants to I don't know how to say it. Basically, is scared of making that decision himself. I'm completely fine if you have an asset, if you have one enemy, that someone is gonna be the, how do you say Tantosha?
The person in charge.
The person in charge of
that
asset.
The person in charge of animating that asset, and if you go to that animator particular, because he's gonna be responsible for that asset completely, and I discuss with that animator while the lead animator is present of how we're going to do the asset. It should never be a discussion from a lead to just an artist. The lead of the animation, for example, rigging and animation are next to each other.
Right.
So I shouldn't go to one of his animators without telling him that I'm talking to one of the animators about a certain thing. It should always be something that the leader of the department should know and should be in discussion with. It's completely fine if you want to ask other animators if you're not sure, but you can't be unsure 100% of the time. And that's what I see a lot here.
Okay. Right on.
So we're gonna take that feedback about the microphone. We understand our equipment is not the best. The feedback is that we sound like we're recording in a bathroom, and we apologize for that.
Sorry.
Dante 1, I don't have any predictions for Game of Thrones because I don't watch Game of Thrones.
What about Boss Beat?
I don't have any predictions because I tried to erase everything from my brain so I can just be pleasantly surprised or upset, one of the two. But I think we'll wrap up with that. I know that we've been speaking for quite a bit of time, and it's been a lot of fun. I could speak for the next few hours.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Yeah,
that's why I stayed in. No, thank you.
But yeah, thanks guys for listening again. Remember to subscribe, and if you want us to use the phone and maybe have better quality moving forward, we need 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. So please go ahead and subscribe, get your friends on there. We will make this into a podcast, of course, as per usual. So this will be available for you to listen to on the go or in your house while you're cleaning, whatever you want to do. But yeah, that's it. And thanks a lot again. Somebody want to take us out?
Thanks, XCM.
Take us out.
Yeah, no.
Take us out, Big P.
Take us out, Big P.
Thanks, guys. Much love.